Now let's turn to the second attribute that we want to talk about today. And it's coming up now in this slide about solid financial management. And in this context, it has a very particular meaning. It means that resources go where they're intended to go, that costs are controlled, meaning you don't overspend, you don't have the cost overruns. And the third is that the cost of some general activities, such as the management of the firm, the director's salary, the HR office's payments, that those are allocated across projects and other activities in a fair and consistent and accurate way. And those are, the third part is often called overhead. That's the basis on which overhead rates are, or the purpose for which overhead rates are calculated. I'm not going to go into that. I really want to focus on the first two. By way of introduction, I just want to say that I've worked with a few dozen think tanks over the last 20 years, and only about 10% do a good job in this area, which means that they really are kind of wasting a good deal of their money through just inefficiency. The good news is that this is a problem that's pretty easily addressed. It mostly has to do with providing managers with better information. And so how do we do that? There are 5 steps that are on this slide, but let me just give you an example of the kind of consequences I'm talking about for not getting this right. It's really easy to spend $3,000 to win a $10,000 grant, and if you have a 30% cost to award ratio, you'll soon be out of business. You may have projects that are overrunning by 30-40%, and the senior management has a sense that there's too much money being spent there, too many staff hours going into it, but they don't really know. And so they kind of go down the hallway and they ask the team leader, "How are we doing?" And he gives you back an interesting, equally imprecise answer, and everybody goes away a little uncomfortable, but with no ability to do anything about it. So we want to empower you, if you will, to do better. Okay, so the first step here is to assign project numbers to activities. If you don't label it, you can't track it. And what do I mean by an activity? Certainly any research project. Also, any major communications plan that is not associated with a project, and as well as every proposal that's written. Those are the big guys, but you may have others than your particular operation that spend a significant amount of money as a discrete activity, and those are the ones you want to capture. That's one step. Second step is, for each of those activities, you've got to have a fairly detailed budget. If you don't have a budget, then the manager doesn't have any targets to work against. It's kind of this open-ended thing, and open-ended is not good for cost management, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you. The third element in here is timesheets, so that you can track labor usage. And we're going to talk about that a lot more, because it's just fundamental, given that labor's 70% of your costs. Fourth point on, make sure that if you don't track all the non-labor costs in a lot of detail, make sure you get at least the major items in there. The cost of a conference, for example. Travel is really easy. It's discrete. You can park that. You can identify it and ascribe it to a project. And finally, you think about this. You got all this information now. If the managers don't have it, the project manager, the activity manager doesn't have this on a timely basis, it's all for naught. So, ideally, you'd like managers to get this every 2 weeks. I think the maximum time period to get a new cost report is a month, and even then you're stretching it. You all, you do these projects, and you all know that even a project that may have a year time horizon often has, a month or two where it's really intense. And if the manager isn't getting pretty up-to-date information, he can blow the project right by the budget limit in that if he doesn't have information on where he stands. So the next slide coming up here is a timesheet. And it's sort of interesting. In January 2011, I gave a workshop, 3-day workshop on managing think tanks, and there were 71 participants, mostly from Gulf countries. And of those, two had a timesheet system in place. And there's a lot of resistance to these. It's sort of interesting. I talked to, just a few years ago, I talked to a Russian institute, the Gaidar Institute, named after the former prime minister, and was finding out about how they handle financial items. And they had a lot of money from USAID, which required them to have timesheets to support labor charges. And so I asked them if they had a timesheet system, and they said no. And I said, well, how do you meet this requirement from USAID? And they said, oh, we make them up when we need them. Oh, well, that's, my goodness, if you're going to go to all the trouble to make them up, why not just have a system? But anyway, you can see there's some resistance to this, and I don't know why that is, if managers themselves don't want to be too carefully tracked. But anyway, you need to do it. And so here's this timesheet, and you can see that during this week, it's for 1 week for a senior person, that person worked on 2 projects, charged most of his time there, but had an hour on management of a type that presumably would have been defined as allowable to charge, and a couple of hours on marketing. He also took 4 hours of vacation. So everybody knows how all this time is being used. So the trick then, so that's for one person. So the trick then is to aggregate this across all the people working on each activity. And the next slide that I hope is about to appear shows you one part of a 2-part report that managers should get every 2 weeks. And this one shows person by person how much time they charged to his project over the past 2 weeks, or excuse me, for each pay period. And at the end, on the right-hand side there on the end, you see the total number of hours they've ever charged to the project and the number of hours budgeted. And there's a highlighted line there for, it's actually a woman named Medweda Damon. And Medweda, as you can see, is already 10 hours beyond her total project allocation. And in this project, they had about 3 months to go. So if I were the manager, actually I was the manager on this one, I spoke to Medweda and figured out where I had to make adjustments to keep the project coming in on budget. Where I've worked, overrunning budgets was really a very bad thing for a manager to do. Your annual assessment conversation was not pleasant when we did things like that. The second part of this report, so first part is how'd you do on staff, by staff member, but the second part converts everything to dollars and says, okay, for staff, for travel, for communications, for whatever, here's how much you've spent, here are the targets, here's the bottom line so far, and what the total budget for the project. And managers armed with this do just dramatically better at coming in on budget for their projects. Organizations I've worked with that have adopted this are really very positive on it. This includes, for example, the Institute for Urban Economics in Moscow, which is a big operation. When they adopted it, they had almost 100 staff. But the Center for, the Economic Research Center in Baku only had about 11 full-time people, and they adopted it for exactly the same kind of reasons as the Institute in Moscow. So that concludes my remarks. It could be useful for you to talk among yourselves about what your policies and practices are on both of these activities, both of these areas, motivation and cost controlling. So I thank you for your attention, and I